So recovery. So the crisis happens and now you're in recovery mode. And you're really focused on the reputation and the resilience of the team. What kind of long-term structural changes should the board consider post-recovery or in the recovery phase?
From a insurance risk transfer perspective, this isn't completely in our ballpark, but one thing I will say is everything we've mentioned before, it's hopefully having that risk transfer insurance policy in place, liaising with the crisis responders, having the crisis response plans in place. So then any mitigation or reduction of how large a claim scenario can go is mitigated, and the insurance is there to respond as and when it can. And the worst thing that we often see is almost a head in the sand approach to certain perils being insured. And it's that might not happen to us, and therefore not actually showing an interest in that purchasing of insurance. But then post that potential crisis or that loss scenario is then looking to procure that insurance. And at that stage, the market or the capability of the market might have shifted, and then the premium spend could have basically quadrupled compared to what it could be before. So it's always being, once again, reviewing insurance policies and making sure that the adequate level of cover is in place. And hopefully it's not trying to insure something, as the saying goes, while it's on fire.
Ma'am, if I could.
Yes.
So a very different answer, very actionable answer, if you will, for the group. The traditional role of a board focused on value creation and the bottom line, where I do believe in the current world we live in, there has to be a pivot to acknowledge that geopolitics, geoeconomics, and cyber matter in a way they have never mattered in the past. And boards can no longer be as myopic to be just focused on value creation and the bottom line. If you truly want to protect a firm and protect its future and protect its future earnings, the acknowledgement that geopolitics, geoeconomics, and cyber matter and are only going to get more difficult and more complex as the world changes, my first comment is every year, those subject matter experts should come in at the end of a board meeting or a precursor to a board meeting and be part of the education of the board. The other highlight I'll make is your typical board members are, call it, mid to late 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80 years old. They did not grow up in the cyber world with the cyber challenges we now face. Last year, the world had $9 trillion with a T, $1 trillion in cyber losses. Boards are partially responsible for those losses because they did not educate themselves and they did not take the cyber threat seriously enough. Boards, I will tell you right now, today, are behind on geopolitics and geoeconomics materially. Now, they are trying to catch up quickly on geoeconomics, but they are behind. So my first key takeaway is that there should be an educational process for your 4 board meetings a year, where at 3 of them, those 3 topics are peppered in, even if it's just 15 minutes. It now matters. The second comment I will make is I cannot tell you, when I look at the composition of a management team briefing a board, many times, believe it or not, the HR director is not included, the chief security officer is not included, the chief information security officer is not included, the HR director is not included. Depending on the industry, depending on their makeup, either all of them or 1 or 2 of them will not be present. In my personal opinion, this is a massive mistake. Do not let the board meeting be so myopic, and do not let it be closed to having those subject matter experts in the room because of the current environment and where the world is going. Having those people having a seat at the table now matters.
Thank you. Dale, I'll share with you in running hospitals, we have residents. Many of the places I worked were all academic and teaching. And so you have a group of 700 residents there. And guess what? They never worked on paper and pencil. And so you had a little cyber attack, and these folks had no idea how to chart in a medical record because they were just used to the templates in the computers. And so we quickly put together a training session because there was a significant deficit there with folks that have just been trained on computer technology and really aren't used to that paper and pencil. Go ahead. It was just a...
Well, I'm going to give you two responses. One about building resilience and learning from an incident. The board needs to ask for a report with all of the subject matter experts involved. There should be a post-incident, post-crisis evaluation of what worked, what didn't work, where are the gaps, what do we need to do to improve our response, what did we miss? The more important part of that in terms of reputation, from my standpoint, there are definitely things that we as a firm can do to help build reputation post a crisis. I'm not going to get into that today because I don't think that's nearly as important as what I'm going to tell you. I'm all about crisis avoidance, which goes back to the preparation. But it also goes back to something that is very, very key in developing a crisis plan. And it's something that the board can not, again, guide, but influence. And that is, when I talk to clients, corporate clients, and boards, the most important part of a crisis plan, in my mind, are a set of guiding principles. What do you want, as a company, the outcome to be? How do you want it to reflect on your company? It should reflect the values of who you are and what you stand for. And the reason that this is so important, it goes back to when I said, if you talk to a group of executives at any one company, they're not all going to agree on the vulnerabilities. They also won't all agree on the guiding principles. And you need to work through that, obviously not when you're in a crisis, because those become the guiding principles that will tell you how you need to respond. And when you reach, because you're going to have to make some decisions. There are things that you really need to do within a crisis to preserve your reputation at the end. And it's going to involve choices. And I don't mean choices about, anything legal, illegal, things like that. But it will involve choices. And so I'm going to give you a few examples, and then I'm going to tell you a brief anecdote. And it's one of the most important things is do the right thing. Now, that doesn't sound very profound, but you need to think about that. Do the right thing. Be transparent. Now, there are some caveats to be transparent, which we can get into later or talk about after this. But it's, only share facts is part of the being transparent. Don't speculate, in other words. If you're in, companies that have this as a value, safety will be a guiding principle. The safety of the community, your employees, and those in the communities in which you operate. It's going to be different for every company, but it should reflect who you are, and it should guide how you work your way through. It doesn't need to be a long list. Usually it's 4 or 5. but it makes a difference. And I'm going to tell you how it makes a difference. So I've mentioned this one incident. It was a big incident, like a 300-foot fireball in the air. You don't ever want to see those, let me tell you. And interestingly enough, there were no fatalities, for which we were grateful, but there was one young man who was very seriously injured, and it was going to impact the rest of his life. And within that first hour, we'd gotten out a statement. We loaded up 2 company planes full of people and flew them from Texas to Pennsylvania. We had people all over the ground. And it was not our CEO who went. It was the president of that operating unit. In any event, I mean, people went to the hospital. We were taking care of that family and all of their family members. We held town halls. I and 15 members of my staff rotated through for 6 months in that area. The point of this, we had, I don't even remember how many insurance claims, and some of it was like one window broken out, and some of it was some smoke damage to a house. There were all sorts of things. Some of it was cars needed to be washed. The long and the short of this was and then ultimately what we did was we dug up, and if any of you are in the energy industry, this will make sense to you. We dug up 400 miles of pipe to check all of that pipe. And this happened in April. We were trying to get it all done before the winter heating season because we had to have it back in the ground so we could serve the winter heating season, and to make sure that all of that pipe was safe. Of course, we had people evaluating what had happened, which, as it ended up, we knew what had happened, but there was no conclusive evidence indicating why it happened. There was a pretty good understanding of why it had happened, which had nothing to do with the company, but that didn't matter. So this was costly, and it took a lot of time, and it took a lot of manpower, and we're still running a company. And lawsuits, insurance claims, every one of them was settled within 1 year, including the young man who had been seriously injured. And his attorneys told our attorneys in court that in their entire collective years of practice, they had never, ever seen anything resolved that quickly. And they said, and the reason is you did the right thing. And I tell you that, it still gives me chills, but that's what made the difference. And we found out later, no one even told us about this, but we actually won some PR award, a top 5 PR award for one of the most perfectly executed crisis responses. And I say that only because it was reflective of our guiding principles.
Mm-hmm.